On this episode of Technicolor Blood, we are going to talk about Alfonso Cuarón with the new movie Roma coming out this week. So we're going to go deep on his career.
Yeah, I think he's one of our favorites.
He is certainly one of our current favorites. Coming up right now on Technicolor Blood. Technicolor Blood, we are back again, and we are going to talk about Alfonso Cuarón today. So Cuarón, certainly one of our current favorites right now. He's got Roma coming out in theaters, limited release, I believe this weekend, and we will make every effort to catch that very soon and talk about it, but we're going to focus on his existing filmography because he is one of the most visionary and creative visual directors ever, and certainly right now.
Yeah, I think if you ask people, who are the best directors in Hollywood, people run down a list of people who are maybe not the current crop of directors. Sure. They're gonna mention people like Steven Spielberg, and they're probably gonna maybe throw out somebody like a Ridley Scott or like a Martin Scorsese or stuff. And these are guys who, they're still making films, they're still making good films, but they're from maybe the previous generation of filmmakers.
Sure.
You want to talk about today's best crop of directors, the guys who, film people obviously are in love with, but like maybe regular audience members haven't learned the names of quite
Sure.
so much.
Yep.
I think Alfonso Cuarón is probably, he's got to be number one or two in that list.
Sure. Yeah. Huge fan of his. Cuarón is, he's 57 years old. He was born in Mexico City. He currently lives in London, which I did not know, but that kind of clues me into a little bit of a couple of the movies we're going to talk about here. Well, one specifically, because he clearly has some love for that town that he's made his home.
Sure.
We'll talk about Children of Men coming up soon here. But he's been nominated for an Academy Award 6 times. He's won 2. He won an Academy Award for Best Original Screenplay for Y Tu Mama Tambien. And he won again for original screenplay and for editing for, let me back up. He was nominated for original screenplay for Y Tu Mama Tambien, nominated for Children of Men for original screenplay and for editing. And for Gravity, he won Best Director and he won for his editing. He's one of those guys who, he gets his hands deep in every picture he does. He wrote most of his most popular films, obviously directed. He's done a lot of editing as well. He's just one of those guys that's going to have complete control. I read an article a couple of weeks ago where the producers were, it was like a producers roundtable, and one of them was talking about sort of the difficulty in working with directors, and the one that she had mentioned was Alfonso Cuarón, which was related to Roma. So maybe we'll get a little bit into that, but we just kind of wanted to go down his filmography a little bit and talk about some of our favorites from him and maybe some of our favorite moments, and maybe a little bit of what makes him different than some of the other directors that are going right now.
Yeah, sure. Before we jump into that though, let's just put a fine point on the fact that right now in Hollywood, 3 of the best directors are all Mexican directors.
Yep.
Right? So three in a row Oscar Best Picture wins came from 3 Mexican directors.
Mm-hmm.
Cuarón was one of them, Guillermo del Toro, one for The Shape of Water, Alejandro Iñárritu, one for The Birdman.
Mm-hmm.
That just can't be glossed over.
Yeah.
I mean, that is a fascinating thing that's happening in Hollywood right now.
Yep, and Iñárritu also had the Revenant,
Sure.
which I don't think it won Best Picture, but it certainly had a lot of critical acclaim.
Yeah, and
got Leo his first Oscar.
Sure.
And I don't know, I loved that movie. Like I was a huge fan of that one. But yeah, it's a strange thing that's happened all of a sudden, but I'm glad to see it happening, because for me specifically, Iñárritu and Cuarón are, maybe 2 of my top 3 or 4 current directors going right now.
Yeah, and I mean, Del Toro maybe he's not up there with them in the filmmaking capacity, but visually, I think he's the most striking of the 3.
Yeah, I think Guillermo makes a little bit more towards the more consumable, sort of
box office friendly.
Yeah, those kind of movies. Whereas these other 2, Iñárritu and Cuarón, are a little bit edgier, a little darker, and I think a little bit more visionary, if that makes sense.
Sure.
But for visual look alone, you can never leave Del Toro out of that. He's sort of to me like the modern day version of what Tim Burton was when he was in his prime, where he had
agreed.
that like distinct visual look. Like Del Toro is that guy now for me.
Yeah. But definitely of the three, I think Alfonso Cuarón is probably our favorite.
Yeah. And Inarritu has a lot of great ones too. Babel was awesome. Like I said, I love The Revenant, but Cuarón for sure, specifically because of, mainly two of the movies in his filmography that we're going to talk about is it's certainly got to be my favorite current director as far as who's, in his prime right now. Because like you said, there's still a lot of guys that are kicking around movies, Scott, Scorsese, Spielberg, but this guy is certainly in his prime right now.
Sure.
So he had a couple of movies before some of his more notable ones. He started out with a movie called Solo con tu pareja from 1991. He did A Little Princess in 1995.
Which was probably the film that, introduced most people in America to him.
Yes.
Certainly within the industry.
Sure. And but still sort of a little bit under the radar there. He did Great Expectations in 98.
With Gwyneth Paltrow.
Yeah,
right?
and maybe was De Niro in that also? I could be wrong about that.
Yeah, I can't remember who plays the male.
Yeah, I don't recall. And then anyway, like one that really started getting him some big critical acclaim was Y Tu Mama Tambien from 2001. He also wrote that one and edited it as well. And I saw that. I don't remember it too well, but I remember enjoying it when I saw it. I liked that movie a lot because I love movies that take place in a world in the real world, but in a place that I have no frame of reference for. I don't exist in that place.
Yes.
I don't identify with it. I love movies like that because it's something that I have no knowledge of.
Yeah. So for context to that, the movie is shot and takes place in Mexico. It's a Mexican film, obviously. And it's a road trip picture.
It's a coming of age road picture.
Yeah. So you get to see these characters traveling across the Mexican countryside, going to this, mythical, gorgeous beach as their destination. So it's very dreamy and very just gorgeously photographed. And as you say, it's a coming of age story, heavy sexuality in it, a lot of nudity and things like that. Stuff that I think probably made American audiences uncomfortable. I don't remember it showing up in a lot of like big box chain theaters.
Yeah.
It was mostly in independent theaters and stuff. But everyone who saw it, word of mouth for it was crazy high at the time. I don't want to get away from the topic of talking about the film if you want to talk about it more, but just a little piece of trivia. Do you know what film he walked away from in order to make Y Tu Mama Tambien?
I do not.
It was Heart's War.
Really?
That World War II film with Bruce Willis.
Yeah.
He was attached to...
That instantly forgettable movie.
Yeah.
That could have been...
So talk about the best decision any director could make with their career.
Sure, yeah. I remember Y Tu Mama Tambien just being very heavy on the, the young male characters sort of figuring out sexuality.
Yes.
And I know there was I don't know if it was a controversial scene that took place on the diving board. Mm-hmm. That's the one I'm sure that made folks really uncomfortable in America. But it was, like I said, it's one of those movies that for me, just as, a white male American, I didn't have much frame of reference for it. And so I just loved seeing his window into that world, which has sort of come full circle now because Roma, which we're gonna make every effort to see coming up here soon, is another one that takes place like where he grew up, and he's clearly very heavily rooted in where he came from, and is wanting to get those stories out there, which I think is awesome. So I'm really looking forward to that one as well.
Yeah, and that film also launched the two male leads' careers. I can't remember the other lead, but I know Diego Luna was one of the two young men in it.
Right.
He's gone on to have a very successful career, and strangely enough, he's got that kind of exotic look that allows him to play lots of different nationalities. He's very rarely cast as a Mexican character.
Yep, and so sort of a strangely whiplash there. He goes from this very personal story that this coming of age, small, sort of low profile film to Harry Potter.
Yes.
Sort of in the middle. I don't recall which Harry Potter movie this is and the order
Number
of
3.
them. Number 3. Okay, so sort of in the middle of the run, he was tapped to direct Harry Potter and the Prisoner of Azkaban, which, for my money, is far, far and away the best of those movies.
Yeah. So the 2 previous films had been directed by Chris Columbus, who, if he's known for anything, he's known for directing kids movies like Home Alone. So, he's kind of the perfect choice for the first Harry Potter film, and I guess the first 2, because the core cast is all very, very young. They're kids. He's great with kids. He does a remarkable job. When it was clear that the books were runaway hits, the films were going to be huge hits as well, and Warner Brothers was like, let's really evolve these films the way the books evolve. Let's put a director who can really take it to the next level. That's when they tapped Cuarón to do the 3rd one, and I mean, it's just like it is a step up in every way.
Oh yeah.
Yeah. I mean, visually it is a remarkable film to look at. It's also the first film where you can just really see the influence of Steven Spielberg on Cuarón's style. Like there are a few shots in that film that, I mean, they feel just prime Steven Spielberg when you see them.
Yeah. I feel like it's rare that a studio will take a guy who, he's a director of some note, but they usually want to go with sort of a safe pick when it's a guy who's going to direct an existing property from a big series of sequel movies. Like a good recent example is with what happened with Ron Howard and the Star Wars movie. He was a perfect choice to do that movie.
Yeah.
But I like it when they take chances and they take a guy who has a little bit more of an edge to him, and just not that sort of antiseptic type of director. I'm not trying to slam these guys. I just mean like there's a certain type of director, I guess, that you expect to direct a popular property movie in the middle of a run of several movies.
Sure.
And so that was a bit of a surprise when it happened.
I would say that we haven't seen, or to put into context of how out of left field this decision was, the next example of that I can think of that's literally on the same level of being that unexpected is when they gave Guardians of the Galaxy to James Gunn. Like, here's a guy who had only made schlocky horror comedies whose sense of humor was way, way beyond anything that Marvel had ever toyed with. Yeah. Obviously, it ended up
which cost him his job
poorly, but I mean, not before he gave that studio 2 massive blockbusters. And the same thing happened with Harry Potter and the Prisoner of Azkaban.
Yeah, and of course the other familiar example we've mentioned several times, Peter Jackson doing the Lord of the Rings movies. So that has been done to success.
Yes.
So like I would be so excited about, like, again, I'm not like, I love the Marvel movies and the Star Wars movies and all that, like, just fine. It's not my favorite, but I enjoy them. But I would be super stoked if they threw a movie from one of those to a guy like Cuarón or Inarritu. I'm sure those guys now are obviously so successful and they want to do their own personal films that they would never even consider doing something like that. But I would love to see, whatever the current version, because, when he directed Harry Potter, he was, he had only done a couple of smaller films and then that, Y Tu Mama Tambien. So whoever that guy is right now, I would love to see get a shot at like a Marvel film or a Star Wars film or one of these big property films. The studios just don't pay attention enough to the importance of the director. They're just so focused on what the existing property story is about and the cast.
Were you a fan of the Harry Potter films? Had you even seen the Harry Potter films before this one? Like, do you remember your reaction to seeing this one versus the first 2? I
do. I have not read any of the Harry Potter books. I was not a big fan of really the movies or the books, but it's, one of those things where I'll always see the big blockbuster movies just because I like movies. So I'll always go see them. Yeah. And, I saw the first couple and, they were fun. They were entertaining and all that. But yeah, the third one knocked me over because I went in with very little expectation. Yeah. And of course, I didn't know Cuarón as current Cuarón then. Yeah. So all I had known him from was Y Tu Mama Tambien. And I can't even tell you for certain that I had seen Y Tu Mama Tambien at that point. Right. I may have gone back and said, wow, that was incredible. I'm going to go check out this guy's previous films. But yeah, no, there was a noticeable difference between that and the first 2, and then a noticeable drop after that when he, when he moved on. Yeah.
I had the same experience. I had seen the first 2. I had enjoyed them. I was reading the books at the time, but I remember within 10 minutes of Prisoner of Azkaban starting, like, I just got chills. I was like, this director is on another level. This film is just elevated above those first 2. And I mean, couldn't have predicted where that franchise was obviously going to go from there. I mean, like, I think Warner Brothers was very, very smart. But I mean, I think he probably doesn't get enough credit for what he brought to that franchise, because I don't know that another director could have really pushed it high enough where it would have just kept going in this sort of adult capacity the way he did.
And I'm curious to see, I'm sure there's stuff out there. I don't know how open Cuarón is with the media, but I'd be curious to see what he thought of that experience, because if you look at the rest of his filmography before and after, he not only directed, but he wrote and he edited. And obviously he was not going to write or edit this huge movie for Harry Potter. So he only directed it and then, did whatever he did afterwards in post. So I'd be really curious to see, now that some time has passed, like currently how he views that time in his life currently, and then when it was actually going on, what he thought of it, if he got into it in a couple of days and was like, oh my God, these studio suits are all over me. It was good timing for him, because I'm sure at the time he said, well, I've done these kind of small movies. I've done some movies that are not really of huge note before that. So it was a huge opportunity. And I'm sure he had artistic conflict to go in and do something that was so popular, but he absolutely knocked it out of the park. So I'd be real curious to see if he reflects back on that fondly, or if it was one of those things where he's just like, yeah, that wasn't the best experience.
And also, to his credit, I think a lot of directors at this point, here he is, he's kicked in the door of American filmmaking. He's, had this massively successful film in a big franchise. I'm sure he's getting tons and tons of offers. He could have directed literally anything. He could have cashed in a fat paycheck. But instead, he takes that experience and the power that's now given him, and he goes back and he makes another film that is entirely his own. He disappears and makes a film, and whereas Y Tu Mama Tambien was a bit of a love story to Mexico, his next film, Children of Men, is, let's not say a love story, but it is a reflection of his new home, which is, as you mentioned, London. Yeah. And you got to give him credit for having the balls to take the gamble on Children of Men. Yeah.
And I've been dying to do a director spotlight episode for a while now. And I'm so glad that Cuarón is our first one, because we're both such big fans of his. But our next movie we're going to discuss, like you mentioned, Children of Men, Harry Potter, Prisoner of Azkaban came out in 2004. 2006 brought us Children of Men. And I absolutely love this movie. It is still my favorite movie of this century. We're 18 years into it.
Wow.
And it is still my favorite movie of this entire century so far. I love that movie on so many levels. They took Clive Owen and made him a competent leading man.
Yes.
Like we've talked a little bit before about how, an actor gets hooked up with a good director and suddenly, wow, who's this guy?
Yes.
And I think that's another good example of that.
For sure.
Children of Men, near future sci-fi set in a world that, if you watch it today, is frighteningly accurate, especially at the beginning. I don't know if you've seen it recently.
It's been a couple of years.
The whole beginning of that movie is about immigration, and the whole start of that movie is him going through town. The bomb happens at the beginning in that coffee shop, but then there's that whole situation where you see all these immigrants being rounded up and put in cages. And, they're being stripped down and being forced to move into other areas, and they're being pushed around. They're not being lined up against the wall and shot or anything. Mm-hmm. It's very frighteningly sort of realistic.
Yeah.
And I'm not, obviously, we live in America, and we have our own political turmoil right now. So I'm not even saying this on an American level with what's going on, but the immigration quote unquote debate is going around all over the world. Yeah. It's as big a deal, if not a bigger deal, in Europe as it is in the States right now. And I mean, the movie couldn't be more prescient to times right now. It's frightening how on par it is with what's going on in the world. But man, I want to give you a chance to talk as well. I just love this movie so much. It's so he just incorporates, like you hear a movie described as gritty, and you're like, okay, what does that mean? Think of like early Scorsese and some maybe like Brian De Palma stuff and Coppola, and just that gritty feel. Some of the Ridley Scott films, and he just took it up to a whole new level in this movie for me. So I'll let you talk now, because I love that movie so much I could go on and on.
Yeah, so that movie is, it's also a bit like Y Tu Mama Tambien in that essentially the film is sort of a road picture. It's constantly traveling, as Clive Owen, as the main character, is trying to escort this young woman who is pregnant out of the dangerous totalitarian government suppression of London and get her someplace where she can safely have this child for science fiction reasons. And so as a result, you're constantly moving, and it gives you this tour of the world that they've created for this film. And I mean, it's a world that is something that has never been depicted in film before. It's as revelatory as Blade Runner was, I think, in '82. And just visually, we keep saying this, but the movie is just visually amazing. It's the first film that you see Cuarón perfecting this technique that he develops and then later really, really brings into play in subsequent films, where he embraces digital filmmaking to allow him to make incredibly long, uninterrupted camera shots. In situations where cameras are moving in ways that no one has ever made a camera move before. There's a sequence in this film. It's a car chase, and the camera in one continuous uninterrupted shot created digitally moves in and out of a moving vehicle, spiraling around the cast, giving close-ups to different characters, showing you things that are happening outside of the vehicle before moving back into the vehicle. And it's all just smooth and flows so well that it's not distracting to the audience. You can watch these long 5-minute long camera shots, and it's only in the very, very back of your brain that you're realizing I'm seeing everything, but it's not cutting between different camera angles to show it to me. It's amazing technique, truly amazing.
And in that scene specifically, when they go away from one character and they focus on the next character, it ratchets the tension up so much because, like you mentioned, you're not cutting, so there's no passage of time going on in this sequence, and it just kicks the tension up so effectively. I'm sure that's one of those movies that when it came out, there were like all the filmmaking technical magazines and websites or whatever were all over that, like they are for current films now when there's some piece of new technology that's employed.
And it's crazy that this was hugely influential, right? Like movies started doing a lot of this afterward. Television now does it now. And the vast majority of audience members still don't understand how this is accomplished. Like, I brought this up previously, and I'll bring it up again. There is a fight sequence in the first season of Daredevil that people rave about because it appears to be one contiguous shot. It's not. It's multiple takes that have been digitally edited together. Sorry, I can't speak. To appear as though it's one continuous shot. And that's the same thing that was done here, right? It appears unbroken, and the camera is moving in and out of this vehicle and stuff. It's not. It's all being digitally done. It's all cobbled together from multiple takes, shot on a sound stage in front of a green screen. Tons and tons of work by the crew to accomplish this. But we've reached a point where that sort of thing is so well done, and the digital bullshittery of it is hidden so well that audiences just don't even realize what they're really watching anymore. And here's a guy who pioneered that.
There's another sequence in that movie that has the one long continuous shot, I believe, when they're escaping from that building. A shootout ensues of some kind, and he's trying to get the pregnant woman out of this building, and then down the road, and there's two like rebels clashing with the government troops.
Yes.
And I mean, it is edge of your seat, like gritting your teeth tension, and done so well, like on a technical level. And I just every time I see that movie, I lose myself in it completely. I can't speak enough about the skill and the visionary ability of Cuarón to take you through that. And what you said, is essentially a road picture.
Yeah.
Trying to save this woman. That's the very simple element of what the story is. But man, the way he gets from A to B, it's so relevant. It's so visually stunning, and yet sort of so simple. And he pieces all those things together with such a deft hand. And I mean, there's not a movie that I recommend more to people than Children of Men, unless I sniff out that they don't really care much for sci-fi. But I think my favorite kind of sci-fi, because of Blade Runner, is sort of like the more reality-based sci-fi,
right?
Where, it's a future world, but it's not and it may be a little bit more over the top than what actually comes to pass, but you can see where it's based in reality. And for me, Children of Men is the number one like gold standard of that kind of movie.
Yeah, and maybe the best thing about the film is that, and we've complained about how Hollywood has lost its ability to do this, it has an actual ending.
Yes.
Like there is a fulfilling end to this film.
Right.
And, as you pointed out, this was the first film. Well, no, I guess it wasn't the first film, but he wrote it as well.
Right.
So, he's a storyteller in addition to being a filmmaker.
Yep. He also edited that one. So that's one of those, again, I think we mentioned recently on an episode where a movie comes along, you don't know how influential it is until many years later. Mm-hmm. And I mean, I don't recall off the top of my head what was nominated and what won Best Picture for 2006, but I know for me that it should have been this one. Yep. Not that I ever expected it to, because again, sci-fi doesn't really get that kind of acclaim. Even I mean, there's no more reality-based sci-fi movie I don't think ever made than this one.
Right.
So, but now the guys winning awards left and right, which we'll talk about on the next one. So
yeah, and just to sum up, Children of the Men, more timely now than when it was released. If you haven't seen it, watch it. I mean, you just watch it.
Yeah, and I mean, even at the time, there was I'm sure that thought of I could see where the world is going that way, and for the fact that it actually ends up being more relevant than we ever thought.
Absolutely.
12 years later is pretty incredible. So
if you're one of those people who enjoyed the politics of and the fiction of the Handmaid's Tale TV series that's so popular right now, then this is right up your alley. Yep. Check it out.
Good call. All right. So love that movie. We'll move on to 2013. Cuarón wrote, directed, and also edited Gravity. This one obviously was another that was this was a big commercial success, if I remember correctly.
Yes, very much.
It starred George Clooney and Sandra Bullock, and I mean, this was just sort of a rip-roaring action sci-fi ride from start to finish, and one of those movies that you say, okay, this is worth seeing not only on the big screen but maybe even IMAX, maybe even 3D. Obviously, it's about a fictional disaster that happens up in near orbit, and again, tons and tons of never before seen technology was used in this movie. And the thing I think I take away, I think my most positive thing to say about Gravity is that it was 90 minutes long. The movie starts and it goes, and it finishes, and that's it. And no one does that.
Yeah. The only other film that I can think of recently that does what Gravity did is Mad Max Fury Road.
Right. Yep.
The film starts, you take a deep breath, and then you just hang on.
Yeah.
And 90 minutes later, you're left panting at the end of it.
I love it. Yeah. I love that, because there's obviously there's a place for the more long drawn out movies that have a lot of story set up and then they draw out the ending. But Cuarón knew the kind of movie he was making here, and he executed it to perfection. And I mean, really, if you think about, and Gravity was one of those that was nominated for Best Picture. When you think of Best Picture nominations, you don't think of 90-minute films ever.
No.
I just always assume that anything that's got Oscar hype is going to be a minimum of 2 hours, more likely 2.5.
Yeah. In addition to being nominated, we should point out it won 7 Oscars.
It did. It won 7 Oscars. He
including Best Picture.
Yeah, Best Picture, and I think that's one he won for Best Director, if I recall correctly. Yes, he won for Best Director. He also won for Best Editing on that one.
Wow, cleaned up.
Yeah. So it's almost like people saw what was there from Children of Men. Cuarón, like, whoa, look at this guy, and then he was more recognized for it in Gravity.
And this film also, I think, is probably the reason for a little bit of Sandra Bullock's career renaissance.
For sure, yeah, she had a lot of other leading roles come after that, and just sort of popped right back up into the spotlight, so,
and really shone a spotlight on her ability to be a dramatic actress.
Yeah, and this is another one where, I mean, awesome job of ratcheting up the tension. He's just so good at that. And I don't think of him as an action director, really. When you look at his filmography, he has basically 3 action movies in a row with the Harry Potter, Children of Men, and Gravity. But I don't really consider him an action director. I consider him sort of a visual dramatic artist who happens to set his tales in the backdrop of something that has action elements in it.
Yeah, absolutely. And he's not just a technically impressive director
Right,
either. It's not just the visuals, although the visuals are phenomenal. But I mean, he elicits really extraordinary performances from his actors. His actors all love working with him. And it's doubly intriguing because he's, English is a second language and he's not really strong at it. During his acceptance speech at the Oscars, you kind of have a difficult time understanding what he has to say. And I want to say it might even have been in that speech where he cracks a joke about how he scared Sandra Bullock when he first met her because he said that I'm going to give you herpes. And it turned out it was just his English was so poor. What he was trying to say is, I'm going to give you an earpiece.
I have not heard this story.
Gotta love it.
He probably gave her herpes anyway.
Whoa.
No. Yeah. So Gravity, I mean, I feel like that movie sort of weirdly got a little bit of a backlash because people like Neil deGrasse Tyson had to chime in and the realism of it and all that. Oh my God, are you not understanding what the point of a movie is?
Yeah.
But I mean, that was a great in theater experience, and I remember sort of being almost out of breath at the end of that thing. It just went so hard so fast and then wrapped up, and man, just a big fan. And there's that really cool sequence where Sandra Bullock is, she's drifting. She thinks she's going to die in space. And then she picks up that weird signal from like some person that's stationed where there's like this, it's like a snow and ice. It basically looks like Hoth from Star Wars. Yeah. And they have that sort of weird back and forth interaction. Man, it's things like that put him over the top for me. The main course is always the crazy visual look and the good story that's the foundation, but he always has those sort of little things interspersed in his movies that I think kind of sets him apart from other directors that there's real no explanation for that had people talking, like what was being said in that exchange. Do they even have any idea? And I want to say maybe Cuarón's brother or maybe his son actually later on directed like a short version of whatever was going on in that little ice area.
Whoa.
That actually incorporated the Sandra Bullock part as just like sort of a small part of that experience.
I've never seen that. I've got to look that up.
I'm 99% certain that actually happened. I didn't dream it. So kind of interesting thing to check out. So yeah, can't say enough about Gravity. That was a lot of fun, and just he just made the perfect movie going experience. Fun, action, get in, get out, 90 minutes, you're done.
Yeah.
Even Clooney and the other thing that was unusual about it is that it had two actors in it.
Yeah.
It had two actors. It basically had just a couple quote unquote locations. I know it was, obviously heavy green screen, but for you took such a stripped down, distilled story and set it in that amazing setting of, near orbit and just the incredible stuff where the debris is coming back for them. And oh my God, just, I want to watch it again, but I want to watch it again on the big screen.
Right. And just to tag in what we were saying earlier about Children of Men and that technique he had of crafting these long continuous shots, the first, 15 minutes of Gravity all appears to be one unending shot where you just, it's in space. So you're just traveling around the space shuttle and the space station and, all these astronauts and their little EVA packs and everything. So it's just this long shot and then all hell breaks loose. And again, it's all part of this one shot. Like the logistics of, again, made up of multiple takes, but the logistics of shooting all of it so that you can then edit together so it seamlessly appears to be one shot. The planning and the vision that the filmmaker has to have to pull that off is just amazing. It's such a hard thing to do.
And to not compromise. I've seen a lot of accounts of him. He is just as uncompromising as a filmmaker could possibly be, similar to Inarritu, which, he very famously was extremely uncompromising on the Revenant shoot.
Right. Which is, that is an element of all the best filmmakers. Ridley Scott, also famously hard to work with because he is demanding.
Yeah. Yep. So, and that's also another one where I think you mentioned how Children of Men had a great ending. I thought Gravity had the perfect ending as well. We've all seen Gravity, so it's not, you've all seen it by now. She gets back to Earth, and there's that awesome shot of like her feet and her hands like digging into the clay as she pulls herself off. It was just such a perfect ending to that movie. And they had all the stuff that was set up from the dialogue, the whole show me don't tell me, that technique that happened while they were in space about what happened with her daughter and all those sort of questions you have. So your brain's like, oh, I really want to see like sort of what happens with her when she gets back. Like, how does she change her life? What is different about her? But you know, he leaves you wanting to know that without giving it to you, which I think is, I wish more filmmakers would do that.
Right.
Make you want something, but not actually give it to you.
Yes.
I like that technique. And so you're just left to your own imagination at the end with that perfect ending with, like I said, her digging into the clay and pulling herself up, you know, sort of symbolically after coming out of that is just a perfect ending.
And the camera shot capturing that is, I won't even try to describe it because it's a crazy angle and everything that the camera does, but it's actually the shot from the film I remember best. It's so good.
And that's why I love the way it ended, because you have all this insanity that happens, you know, up in near orbit with the debris and the crazy angles that the camera's taking, and just as insane as that movie is on a technical level and all the crazy visuals, but at the end it's literally flesh and dirt.
Yeah.
You know, flesh and mud, and that's it. And you're like, oh my God, I'm exhausted.
Yes. And she's exhausted. Like she's just worn out. The audience is worn out. It's an experience.
Yeah. All right. So I think that'll do it for this episode. Sort of honoring Alfonso Cuarón's existing filmography. He has Roma coming out. It's already, I think, probably shot to the forefront of early Oscar contenders.
Absolutely. I mean, the advanced buzz for this film is off the charts right now.
Yeah. We're going to try to check it out, and we will talk about it on a future episode. I feel very confident about that, so I'm saying it out loud and also locking us into it. So we'll do it again soon. We appreciate you guys listening as always. And we will see you on the next one.
If any of the movies we talked about you have not seen, please check them out. Let us know what you think.
Absolutely. All right, guys. See you next time.